Each year in ancient Rome, two consuls were elected for a year-long term, and these consuls had the highest responsibility for the well-being of the Roman people, and were in theory the most powerful of all Roman officials. The consuls of 59 BC were the famous Julius Caesar and a man named Marcus Bibulus. The two consuls absolutely hated one another, or rather, Marcus Bibulus hated Caesar, whereas Caesar was busy making actual political achievements. This was not the first time that these two shared responsibilities, as in 65 BC they both served as aediles and arranged that year's public festivals and celebrations. Caesar's performance seems to have had outshined Bibulus by far, and the Roman populace were especially pleased with the festivities that Caesar arranged during the celebration of Ludi Romani. 3 years later, they had both been elected praetors, which in this case meant legal administrators, and Bibulus had insisted on opposing Caesar at every turn. Caesar and Bibulus belonged to different political camps, which may explain some of Bibulus' remarkable hostility. Bibulus belonged to a group of politicians who called themselves Boni, or the good men. The Boni, or optimates, defended the interests of the Senate and the Roman elite, and they opposed the populares, the Roman populists, who wanted to increase the rights of the common people of Rome. Caesar, in contrast to Bibulus, was born into a family of populares, and his uncle, Gaius Marius, was the main populist leader of his time, a responsibility which Caesar largely inherited. But Roman politicians were not at all strictly divided into optimates and populares, and Caesar had many friends and acquaintances who might be considered optimates, the most powerful of which were Marcus Crassus and Pompey the Great. Crassus was known for being incredibly rich, whereas Pompey was a general of legendary skill who, among other things, conquered Syria and put an end to piracy on the Mediterranean Sea. Crassus and Pompey had both fought against the populares during the civil war between 83 and 81 BC, but they still weren't trusted by many Boni in the Senate. They were too powerful, too ambitious, and perhaps too talented, which, in the eyes of the Boni, made them a threat to the Republic. A lot of senators were equally opposed to Caesar, as he was a populist and had inherited many of Marius' supporters, which is why Caesar, Crassus, and Pompey naturally started to work together. Together they formed a most powerful conspiracy, and it was with the help of Crassus and Pompey that Caesar was elected consul in 59 BC. In return, Caesar proposed a bill to give land to Pompey's soldiers, a bill which Marcus Bibulus immediately opposed. He treated Pompey's veterans with complete contempt and tried to kill Caesar's bill with all possible methods, including organizing a massive walkout from the Senate and fabricating objections that were religiously motivated. Bibulus annoyed Caesar and the Roman commoners to the point where they physically turned on him. He was gonna denounce the bill by the temple of Castor and Pollux when he was surrounded by an angry crowd. Suddenly, they pushed him to the ground and covered Bibulus with human feces. Bibulus is said to have begged his assaulters to kill him then and there, to spare him from this unbearable embarrassment. This may sound like an extreme reaction, but imagine the shame and the total humiliation of being a consul of Rome who literally gets excrement poured over his face in front of everyone. Then imagine walking home to your wife afterwards. And this is something that happened to a real person in real life. Caesar's bill passed, which brightened the future of thousands of Roman families. But Marcus Bibulus was pretty much broken, which is sad considering that this year was supposed to be the highlight of his political career. He spent his entire rest of a year as a consul in seclusion. Not only did Bibulus refuse to go to the Senate meetings, but he basically refused to go outside altogether. Apparently, Bibulus had to stay at home because he was watching for omens. At the end of a consul's term, he was supposed to justify his actions to the Senate. But when it was Bibulus' turn to justify himself, a tribune of the plebs vetoed Bibulus' right to speak any further, which spared Bibulus from even further embarrassment. At least it spared Bibulus in that particular moment, because years later, Bibulus sided with Pompey in the civil war between him and Julius Caesar. Bibulus was given the critical task of preventing Caesar from crossing the Adriatic Sea with his legions, a task which Bibulus, of course, failed to accomplish. Caesar managed to slip by Bibulus' war fleet, which was vital for Caesar's later victory against Pompey. Bibulus fell ill shortly afterwards, and met his demise on the island of Corfu in 48 BC. It is ironic that Bibulus' name isn't known in its own right, but as a mere footnote in the biography of the man whom Bibulus spent his entire life hating.